So here's 3 tips when you're first getting started with positive discipline. The first tip is to consider doing a lot more asking than telling. Children really appreciate being asked what to do rather than being told what to do. It might sound like, what do you need to put on your feet to be ready to go outside? Simple as that, rather than put your shoes on, time to go. The second tip is also about questions, but they're more about curiosity questions. They're a little more open-ended, and they might start with more like what or how. Something along the lines of, what do we need to do next to be ready for bed? It's a little more open-ended because they might choose, I need to bathe, or I need to put my pajamas on. Or it might be, how do you think that might go? The third tip I'd like to give you is the idea of really anchoring the family in routines. And that way your child can really sense the daily rhythm of the family, and you'll get a lot more cooperation. So there are many benefits to positive discipline, and a few that I really appreciate is the fact that children are given this strong sense of internal motivation for their behavior, which means they're going to learn what is the right thing to do regardless of who's watching or who is around. The other thing I really appreciate positive discipline is that it is teaching a very strong sense of mutual respect, and that's mutual respect for the child and for you, and for the situation, which might involve other people around, like in public or other family members. And these are the kinds of skills we want children to have when they're adults, so why not start young? Sometimes people wonder, when can I start positive discipline? And I love that question because the answer is now, whenever. It's never too late to start positive discipline. Some might think it starts from birth, and it's true. There's many strategies you can put into place, but maybe you haven't heard about it until your child is 1 or 2 or 3, and that's the perfect time for you to start. It's always rooted in this idea of mutual respect, and it's never too early to start practicing that life skill because you're modeling it for your children when they need to see it most. Parents ask me quite a bit about tantrums, and when they start with young children before they're verbal, it can get a little bit tricky on what to do. There's a couple things that you can try. Number 1 is be sure to validate the emotion. So children come to us with big feelings and they need to feel felt. So go ahead and acknowledge that they're upset and watch their facial expressions, because you're looking for signs that they're feeling understood. At that point, you can give them a choice. Would you like this or this? And see if that is enough to kind of pull you out of that. If that isn't, then what I would do is just sit and stay close by and just be present with your presence and your energy and not a whole lot of your words. If it's appropriate, you might reach out and do a little pat on the back. So when you're trying to redirect or distract your child from an activity or a thing that might be unsafe, there's a couple of considerations. Number 1, if you find that they laugh, remember not to laugh. So it's important that our voice, our tone, and our body language matches the message that this is not safe. So we don't need to draw a lot of attention to their laughter. Just make sure that you don't laugh. And it might be tempting, it's kind of hard, because sometimes they're funny and cute, but it is important that we are anchored in what is safe and what is the right thing to do. The second thing to think about is to always give the child the message of what they can do. So often when we're distracting them, we might be telling them what they can't do. Be sure to replace it with what it is that they can do to be safe. So parents are often concerned about tantrums, and if you're seeing that they're happening more and more frequently, or maybe they're getting bigger and louder, sometimes you might feel a little concerned. And I would encourage you to realize that what a tantrum is saying is a child is giving the message of, hey, I want to be the boss too. I want to feel capable, and I don't want you to be bossing over me. I want to be part of this partnership. So what I would encourage you to do is take a look at if you might be inadvertently giving the message to the child that maybe they aren't capable. So help them feel more capable, give them more choices, and maybe acknowledge their feelings in a phrase such as, I wonder if you think, I don't think you're capable of making a choice for yourself. I wonder if you really want to have a say in this matter. That'll give them a little more buy-in. Okay, so when you're in those really difficult situations and you just sort of feel the heat of the moment and you feel like you're about to lose it, just first of all, know you're not alone. Every parent's been there. Hopefully what you can do in that moment is just ground yourself and take a couple of deep breaths. And that little bit of pause is hopefully enough for you to feel a sense of self-regulation, a sense of being grounded, so that then you can feel like you can respond to your child rather than react. But let's face it, if you do react and you make that mistake, that is now a new opportunity to model what it means to recover from your mistakes. And that in itself becomes a great learning opportunity for your child as well. So what do you do when your child maybe is hitting you or swiping at you when they're really mad? It's pretty hard to not lose it ourselves. So what I want you to think about doing is really offering your child of what they can do. So go ahead and react. You can say, ouch, or that hurts, but rather than telling them don't hit or stop throwing or quit kicking or whatever it is that they're doing, instead give them the alternative of what to do. You can maybe gently grab their hand and say, gentle touch. Or you can hug this teddy bear really, really tightly and let this teddy bear know how angry you are right now. Or maybe you can say, let's go outside, and you can scream really, really loud. So give your child some alternatives by telling them what they can do while maintaining the firmness of, ouch, that hurts, and directing their hand away from your face or away from your body. It's hard to know what to use when you need to say no. Children don't like to be told no. Actually, most adults don't like it either. So instead, tell children what they can do. Always give the you can, or here's what's an option for you. So give them the you can or the option. And then if you feel like it's unsafe, instead of saying no, do it with action. So pick them up away from the fireplace or away from the burner, and then just say what you see, or say what is a fact, such as fireplaces are unsafe, stoves are hot. And that way, leave the no out of it, but in your firmness and with your action, they're getting the message that it's not an option. But if no is going to creep out every now and then, just make sure you're using it sparingly so they know you mean it. So a couple of factors that Montessori schools would love to see parents using in the home is to set up an environment that has a lot of order to it. It allows the child's mind to start to really see that everything has a place, everything in its place, and that's actually really appealing to their mind as they're trying to make sense out of the world. The other thing you can be thinking about is, what is your child able to reach on their own, and make sure you start setting up their home or the kitchen where they can be independent about getting things when they want something, like being able to get their own cup or being able to reach their own coat. So hooks down low. The other thing is, less is more. Often we put way too much out, and it'd be better if you rotated things than to have too much clutter. So when your child says no, I bet sometimes it feels almost like paralyzing and you don't know what to do. So here's a couple of tips. Number one, try to always give your child choices. And then if they say no, they might genuinely have maybe a third choice you didn't think of, at which point they're being quite clever and using critical thinking skills. So if you think they actually have a third choice, you might say, what do you have in mind that would work for both of us? And if it's an option, roll with it. If not, you can say, oh gee, I'm sorry, that one's not going to work for us, but you can do this or this, and repeat those choices. Other times a child might be saying no simply because it's powerful to say no. And go ahead and acknowledge that power by saying something along the lines of, oh boy, you really didn't like those choices, and that's all we have today. So children can go through a couple different stages and phases of separation anxiety. It's very normal and it's okay. So if you're in the home and maybe your baby isn't quite mobile yet, What you can do to help them is to narrate, maybe set them down and let them know that you'll be leaving the room, but you'll be coming back. If they're able to hear you, go ahead and talk them through even when you're in the other room. And then a key point is when you come back, is walk over to them, maybe pick them up or sit with them and say, look, I came back. I see that you were a little worried, and I came back. See, what you're doing for your child in that moment is giving them an opportunity to have just a little bit of stress, but backing it with support. And that's sort of the perfect combination for them to build resilience. Here's something I'd love for you to consider, and that is, how could you coach your child into an apology of action rather than forced words? So if you see something they've done that maybe isn't real appropriate, what you can do is invite them to the solution, such as, ouch, I think your sister is hurt. Would you like to go get her an ice pack? Or, ooh, I don't think that grandma likes those words. Would you like to give her a hug and tell her how much you love her? So the idea is give them something to do so that the messaging is that their actions are louder than their words, right? And then be sure that you're modeling appropriate apologies and that they hear you do that, so that in time they're absorbing and will start using that strategy more on their own than being forced. If you do really feel like they need to say you're sorry, at least have it be an invitation. Hey, would you like to offer an apology, or would you like to give them a hug? So a really important tool to start early on, so that you're setting your baby up for toddler years that might be more cooperative, is to really think about the power of routines. Now, routines are hard on parents. They're really not hard on kids. We're the ones that have busy schedules and we're trying to fit so many things in and be flexible. But for a child, their sole purpose is to make sense out of life. And the best way we can aid that is to give them order in that sense. And routines do that work for us. When a child knows what's coming, it actually calms them down and it invites a lot of cooperation. Even when they're not verbal as babies, their minds are making sense out of this order, and that will set them up for when they're toddlers and they find their voice, they'll be a lot more cooperative. Sometimes getting your child dressed can be a little bit tricky, can't it? So let's go back to the way I said that, getting your child dressed. What if maybe they could be more involved in the process so that they felt like getting dressed was not being done to them, but rather was something they were doing for themselves? So can they access choosing their clothes? Do they have a say in what they're going to wear? And then you can make a game out of it, or you could give choices. Would you like to put your shirt on, or should I put your shirt on? Do you want to do your pants first or your socks first? So give them plenty of choices. If they're resisting, you might consider asking a curiosity question. What is it about these pants that maybe you don't like? And you might find there's a tag that itches, or they feel too stiff and they don't like to run in them. So maybe ask them, and they might have a pretty valid reason, and then maybe you could come up with an alternative that you both like. Let's talk about whining. I just want to whine about whining because none of us like it, right? So a couple things that you can do. Number one is you could not really respond to it and maybe simply move into another room. You're not necessarily moving with a lot of emotion. You just sort of separate yourself, which gives a gentle message to the child that you're not available for that. The other thing you could do is say what you want to your child. In other words, hey, I'd like to have a conversation that's pleasant for both of us. Or another thing you can think about doing is using a little bit of humor with them and say, oh gee, I'm not taking any complaints this hour. Try back later. See what happens. What are you gonna do when your child is throwing things? Well, first of all, we have to first recognize they like to throw things. So ask yourself, what is my child trying to tell me? Are they trying to tell me I want to throw? At which point you can adjust the home to make sure that they have things appropriate to throw and where to throw and how to throw. So that's a training opportunity. Now, if they're throwing out of defiance or a tantrum, then instead tell them what they can do. It's really tempting to say, don't throw, stop throwing. No, you can't throw. And that sort of invites them to say, oh, yes, I can. So instead of saying, no, don't stop, give them an alternative. And more importantly, always validate their feelings. Gee, I see you're throwing something because you must be really mad. and we need to be more gentle. So if you're dropping your child off at school or daycare or maybe somebody's home, they might have that sense of anxiety about being separated from you. And sometimes you got to ask yourself, is this really about your child's worry or your worry? Because one of the things that parents often do is linger, and it gives your child a mixed message about whether or not it's safe. So a favor you can give them is to make sure you have a nice connection moment as you say goodbye, and tell them how much you will look forward to seeing them again, and then make the cut real quick. If you want to be a little more specific, you can tell them when you're coming back, like I'll be back after you wake up from nap. So they kind of have a point of reference if they're ready for that. But the key is to have that connection and then make the cut. So what do you do when your child really wants your attention and you're simply not available? Okay, on the preventative side, I want to make sure you have a nice routine chart and build into the routine of the day when you are available. So the child has hope. They know when those windows of opportunity are. And then if they are outside that window and they're being a bit needy, follow that up with a kind and firm statement and then offer a choice where you can say, I can see you really want my attention right now, and I'm not available. You can read a book or go play with your toys. You can decide. So you followed up with that choice and that empowering statement of you can decide. So what do you do when your child wants all that undue attention, when they're acting whining or they're needy? It's so hard because what they're trying to say to you is, notice me, see me, play with me. And of course, we're stuck in this conflict of we'd like to give them attention and we maybe aren't available, and we don't want to feel guilty about that. Here's just something I want to leave you with. Think about the fact that children really just want to feel connected with us. And when they don't feel a strong sense of connection, they'll settle for attention. And that attention may or may not come out in a real useful way. So rather than thinking about stopping whining or tattling or neediness, think about how can I really create authentic connection. So in positive discipline, we have a lot of tools, but honestly, one of my favorite tools is this idea of conveying empathy. Now we got to understand that young children don't totally understand their own feelings, let alone the feelings of others. So we have to be the voice for them. So what you can do to really help them out is to say what you see and attach it to a feeling. And it can be, feelings that are sad or negative or feelings that are happy. Convey the empathy by saying, you look surprised because maybe you weren't expecting that loud sound. You look really happy because we're going over to see our friend. Oh, boy, you're feeling angry, aren't you? Things didn't work out the way you wanted. So just give a feeling with maybe a reason why, and that helps the child really feel felt and understood. A lot of times when I'm giving tips, I get a little bit of pushback because parents say, well, I tried that and it didn't work. And here's the thing is when we take all these little tips in isolation, they might not work. But collectively, when you give choices, when you convey empathy, when you give kind and firm statements, when you engage the child with curiosity or in the process, what you're saying is, I want to have a relationship with you that really offers mutual respect for both of us. So while one tip by itself might not work every time, collectively, as you start building more and more of these into your relationship with your child, you'll see that it wins them over in time. So let's talk about long-term parenting and short-term parenting. I think sometimes short-term parenting is a lot easier on us. It's efficient, it's fast, it's easy. We dress them, we make their breakfast and have it waiting for them. We tell them what to do next. We create the routines. The trouble is it doesn't really engage the child, and they're not necessarily learning their own agency, or they're learning where their power is. And it sets us up for a little bit more resistance. Long-term parenting is a lot less convenient because it takes so much more time and so much more patience. But the message we give them is, in the long term, is they develop all the life skills that we want them to have about being independent, autonomous, confident, and capable of doing things on their own. So you might wonder, what is positive discipline? This word I'm talking about so much. It comes from a book called Positive Discipline, written by Dr. Jane Nelson. And now there are families in well over 80 countries across the globe practicing positive discipline in their homes. It's really founded on the idea of mutual respect, where instead of trying to make children do things, we want to make them want to do something. We want to invite them into the process, into the decision making, and into the contribution, or into the, how the family operates and how can they contribute to make the family flow a little better. It's in that contribution piece, that social interest piece, where a child learns, hey, not only do I belong in this family, I'm actually needed. I'm really valued here. And that is really empowering for a child. So we love to compliment our kids, right? Something I'd like you to think about is, am I giving praise, which is very results driven, it's what they did, it's product driven, versus am I giving the child encouragement, which is more based on effort or who they are or the entire process. So a little bit of a difference between the two might sound like this, like, good job, you did it, whereas encouragement would be, wow, look what you finished. Tell me more about it. So it starts a little bit of a conversation. Or if you see a child struggling, praise might sound like, you'll get it. It's very cheerleader-like. Encouragement might sound like, what tools do you have that are going to get you there? And not only is that giving them a little bit courage to cross the line, it also is helping develop a growth mindset where they're being somewhat reflective on what they can do to get the result they want. So when your baby is young, they're learning language even though they can't express it back yet. And it's really important because they're learning our language by watching not only our mouths move, but all of our body language. So it's important that our language is congruent, our verbal language is congruent with what our nonverbals are saying. So if you're feeling exasperated, it's okay to express a little bit of emotion, and your words and actions should be a bit congruent. Then when you're feeling really happy, then you make sure that those two match up. But if you're saying one thing but non-verbally saying something else, that can create a little bit of confusion for them. So a child's work is to play. It's to experiment and discover. And sometimes they don't play the way adults play. So it's really important to be a scientist yourself and learn how to observe and really take the lead by what your child is doing, and know that what they do with something might be a little different than what you would do with something, and just follow their lead and join them in their play. Or even better, when they're playing, sometimes leave them alone because they're in their own little space. And I think in our excitement, sometimes we can distract those beautiful moments that they were finding within themselves. So be an observer. Is this the time to join? Is this the time to watch? So when I talk about positive discipline starts early as birth, it's about helping children feel how capable they are, about giving them, courage, giving them a voice. And one of the things you can do that, even for a baby who's not verbal yet, is to give them choices. And what you can do is put two things in front of them and say, which one would you like to play with? And watch where their eyes go. And then when you see their eyes go one way, you can say, I can see you must be choosing the blocks for right now. You can do the same thing with food, with what shirt to put on, with maybe if they're a little upset, you can offer them a choice. Would you like a hug, or would you like to go rock in the chair? Do you want to hold the teddy bear, or shall we read a book? Keep giving the language of choices, even if you're not getting a big response, because what they're hearing is that they have a voice, and they'll start using those choices as they become more verbal. Are we going? Mm-hmm. So in positive discipline, we love to have family meetings. And that means a coming together to create cohesion and connection and communication. And it's never too early to include your baby at your family meeting. Even if maybe baby's the only child in the house, you can have a family meeting with your partner where you're sitting down, give each other a compliment, be sure to include the baby in those compliments too. Talk about maybe your schedule for the week, see if there's any things you need to work out, and then end it pretty quickly. Over time, The child's just absorbing themselves into the process of the family meeting. So later when they're verbal, they're contributing to the family meetings, and then later when they're a little bit more abstract, then they can even be running the family meetings. It's never too early to start.